All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a pretty big topic: modernism and postmodernism. You know, those two movements that always seem to be swirling around in conversations about art and culture, but can be a little bit, well, tricky to wrap your head around.
Yeah, they can be a bit slippery.
Exactly. So we're going to break it down for you today using an excerpt from Modernism and Postmodernism.pdf by Dr. Jasvant Rafate. Get ready to unpack some fascinating ideas about art, culture, and basically how these things reflect our ever-changing world.
You know, what I think is so captivating about modernism and postmodernism is that they're not just these abstract concepts tucked away in art museums or, college classrooms. They show up everywhere. You see them in music, books, buildings, even in the way we think about the world around us.
So true. Have you ever, listened to a song or seen a movie and thought, wow, that is so out there, so different? Chances are you're experiencing the influence of modernism or postmodernism. To start off, let's imagine a group of artists in the early 1900s. They're tossing out the old rule books and saying, okay, enough with tradition, let's do something new. And that, my friend, is the essence of modernism, this huge urge to break free from the past.
It really was a major shift. Imagine the shockwaves when composers started ditching traditional melodies or writers abandoned realism. Modernists were all about pushing the boundaries, experimenting with totally new ways to express themselves and their ideas about the world.
It's like a total creative rebellion.
Exactly.
And Dr. Rathod actually pinpoints Vienna between 1810 and 1910 as like a hotbed for this artistic revolution. It's almost like you can picture this earthquake of creativity shaking up Europe. And those tremors, they spread outward through all these groundbreaking movements like Cubism, Dadaism, Surrealism, names you've probably heard before.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And those ripples reach some pretty big-time artists, too, like T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and Franz Kafka. So we're talking about some seriously influential figures here.
We are, but it's really important to remember that modernism wasn't like a one-size-fits-all movement, It was a bunch of different styles and approaches, all kind of united by this desire to break free from the past and forge something new.
Right, like a shared spirit of rebellion and innovation.
Exactly. But to really understand modernism, I think we need to look at its defining features, the things that set it apart and made it such a radical departure from what came before.
Okay, let's dive into those features then. Dr. Rathod outlines 5 key elements of modernism that really revolutionized literature and art. And the first one might surprise you. Modernists loved subjectivity. So instead of portraying the world objectively, they wanted to explore individual perspectives and how we each experience things differently.
Think about it this way. You might look at a painting and see one thing, and the person standing next to you sees something totally different. That's subjectivity at play, and it became like a cornerstone of modernist writing.
It's like saying, hey, there's not just one right way to see the world. We all have our own unique perspectives.
Yeah, and modernists really wanted to capture that multiplicity of perspectives in their work.
So rather than this all-knowing narrator telling us what to think, modernists used techniques like stream of consciousness to let us inside the minds of their characters.
Right, like we're eavesdropping on their thoughts and feelings in real time. It's a much more raw and unfiltered view of their world.
Exactly. And they also played around with different points of view, unreliable narrators, and these fragmented narratives, almost like a puzzle you have to piece together as a reader.
It makes you work a little harder as a reader or a viewer.
It does. But
Yeah.
I think that's part of the point. It's like they're saying, hey, there's no single truth, only multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And to really hammer that point home, they even blurred the lines between genres.
Oh, yeah. I love that aspect of modernism. It's so playful.
They were making novels more poetic and poems more like prose. It's as if they were asking, who says we have to follow the rules? What if we just, mix everything up?
Exactly. And that rejection of traditional forms and structures,
Yeah.
that's a key part of what made modernism so radical and exciting. We see it in their love for fragmented narratives, too, the kind of storytelling that jumps around and leaves gaps for you to fill in.
Like they're not afraid to leave things a little bit open-ended, right?
Right. And a great example of this is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. It's this fascinating jumble of images, voices, and historical references. It's a reflection of how fragmented the modern world can feel.
Okay, so speaking of fragmentation, this is where things get really interesting. We start hearing about a new term in the 1980s, postmodernism. And it's often debated in relation to modernism. Some folks see them as totally separate phases, while others see them as different points on the same spectrum.
It's a tricky relationship for sure.
It is. And to complicate things further, J.A. Cudden, in his Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory, describes postmodernism as embracing things like eclecticism, aleatory writing, parody, and pastiche. Now, I know those are some big words.
Yeah, we might need to break those down a bit.
We probably should.
Okay, so aleatory writing might sound fancy, but it really just means incorporating chance into the writing process. Think about it like rolling dice to decide the order of sentences in a story, or pulling words randomly from a hat.
Wow, so it's like embracing randomness and chance as a part of the creative process.
Exactly. And those other terms, eclecticism, parody, pastiche, they all point to postmodernism's playful and often ironic way of engaging with traditional art forms and ideas. It's not about completely rejecting the past, but kind of like remixing it and playing with it in new ways.
So it's like instead of completely rejecting modernism, postmodernism kind of builds on it in a new way. They both share a love for fragmentation, for example, but there seems to be a big difference in their attitudes towards it.
That's a really key distinction. Jeremy Hawthorne, in his concise glossary of contemporary literary terms, points out that both modernism and postmodernism use fragmentation, but with totally different vibes. Modernists saw fragmentation as like a loss, something to grieve. They longed for a past filled with stability and order, and that sense of loss is expressed through their fragmented art.
It's like you can almost feel the heartbreak in their work, right?
Exactly. Think about Ezra Pound's The Cantos. He actually describes it as a ragbag, which implies that this fragmented form is all that's possible in a broken modern world. Or even T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, where the speaker says, "I have shored against my ruins." It's this desperate attempt to hold on to something amidst the chaos.
Okay, so we've got the modernists who are bummed about fragmentation, but the postmodernists, they're doing something totally different with it, right?
Yeah, they totally flip the script. It's like they're saying, look, we're free from all those old, rigid systems of belief, and we're going to celebrate that freedom.
That's a really cool distinction. They see possibility and change where modernists see loss. And this difference in attitude, it shows up in other areas too, like in their aesthetic preferences, the way they approach beauty and style and art.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Modernism really embraced a kind of minimalism. It was a rejection of anything that felt ornate or excessive.
Like less is more.
Exactly. Think about some of those iconic pronouncements from modernist architects. You have Adolf Loos declaring that decoration is a crime, or Mies van der Rohe famously saying less is more. For them, simplicity and functionality were everything.
So like imagine a sleek, minimalist apartment with clean lines and absolutely no clutter.
Precisely. And we see the same minimalist aesthetic in modernist literature, too. Think of the simple, direct poetry of William Carlos Williams or the stark, bare-bones plays of Samuel Beckett. It's all about stripping things down to their essence.
Okay, I'm getting a really clear picture here. But then postmodernism comes along and throws that whole minimalist rule book right out the window.
They do. It's amazing. They embrace excess, mix high and low art forms, and they're not afraid to be a little bit, well, gaudy.
It's like a celebration of everything that modernism tried to reject.
It is. It's this total rejection of those strict categories and hierarchies that modernism, in some ways, still held on to. And Dr. Rathod gives us this great example of this shift. He talks about the Martian poetry of writers like Craig Raine and Christopher Reid.
Martian poetry. Okay, now I'm intrigued. What is that all about?
So imagine you're looking at the world through fresh eyes like you've just landed on Mars. Everything is new, strange, and fascinating. That's the essence of Martian poetry. It takes the familiar and makes it seem totally alien, forcing us to see things in this new and unexpected light.
I love that idea. It's like defamiliarizing the world, making us see things anew.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big part of what postmodernism is all about. It's about challenging our assumptions, disrupting our expectations, and making us question the way we see the world around us.
Okay, so we've got these two movements with opposing takes on fragmentation and these really different aesthetic preferences. But there's another layer to this whole discussion that we need to bring in, and that's the legacy of the Enlightenment.
Oh, yeah, this is where things get even more interesting.
All right, the legacy of the Enlightenment, you definitely got my attention. What's the connection between these like artistic movements and a philosophical period from, centuries ago?
Well, the Enlightenment, with its focus on reason and progress, really set the stage for how we think about the world today. And modernism and postmodernism are both, in a way, grappling with the legacy of those Enlightenment ideals, each in its own unique way, of course. Dr. Rathod actually points us to Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher whose 1980 paper, Modernity and Incomplete Project, it really stirred things up in the world of postmodern thought.
Oh, okay, so what was so groundbreaking about this paper? Why did it cause such a fuss?
Well, Habermas argued that the Enlightenment, even though it was a product of the 18th century, was still super relevant to the 20th century. He saw it as like this ongoing project, a quest to use reason and critical thinking to improve society and solve problems. And for him, modernism was, in a way, carrying on that torch, even if it was kind of like lamenting the loss of some of those core Enlightenment ideals along the way.
So modernism was carrying on the torch, but also kind of mourning what had been lost.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, but not everyone agreed with Habermas's take. In fact, his ideas sparked a major debate with a group of thinkers known as the French post-structuralists. These were folks like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, and they were all about deconstructing those grand narratives of reason and progress that the Enlightenment championed.
So while Habermas saw the Enlightenment as this positive forward-moving force, these post-structuralists were a bit more critical of it.
Exactly. They were like, hold on a second, can reason really solve all of society's problems? You know? They challenge that idea that there's one universal truth that applies to everyone everywhere.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So we've got this philosophical battle brewing. Where does postmodernism fit into all of this?
This is where Jean-François Lyotard enters the picture. He comes along with this super influential book called The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge, and he directly challenged Habermas. Lyotard was basically arguing that the Enlightenment itself was just another meta-narrative.
Okay, hold on. Meta-narrative. I'm not sure everyone's going to be familiar with that term. Can you break it down for us?
Oh yeah, for sure. A meta-narrative is basically like a grand overarching story or explanation that tries to make sense of everything. Think of big systems of thought like, Christianity, Marxism, or even the idea of scientific progress. They all offer this like totalizing worldview, this way of understanding the entire universe and our place in it.
Ah, I get it. So Lyotard was saying that the Enlightenment, with its big emphasis on reason and progress, was just another attempt to create one big story that explained everything.
Exactly. And he was deeply skeptical of these meta-narratives. He saw them as attempts to, shut down difference and impose a single dominant view of the world. He famously defined postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives.
Wow. So postmodernism is all about being suspicious of any big grand theory that claims to have all the answers. I can definitely see how that would be appealing to a lot of people, especially these days when we're constantly bombarded with information and all these conflicting viewpoints.
It's a pretty powerful concept. And instead of searching for that one big truth, with a capital T, postmodernism suggests that we should embrace the multiplicity of perspectives and interpretations. It's about acknowledging that there are many different ways of seeing the world, and no single viewpoint has this monopoly on truth.
So we need to be open to different perspectives, different ways of understanding things. But does that mean we just throw out the idea of truth altogether? Like if everything is relative, how do we make decisions or judge between different, perspectives? Isn't there a danger of falling into this anything goes kind of mentality?
That's a common concern about postmodernism, but it's not necessarily a fair one. Postmodernism isn't saying that truth doesn't exist at all, but it's more about acknowledging that truth is always contingent, shaped by the context in which it's created. It's like understanding that the meaning of a word can change depending on who's saying it and how it's being used.
Okay, so it's not about rejecting truth entirely. It's more about being aware of how our perceptions of truth are shaped by our background and our experiences.
You got it. It's about, being aware of the power dynamics at play. Who gets to define truth and whose voices are being marginalized or silenced in that process.
That's a really important point. So if we acknowledge that there's not this single objective truth out there, how do we navigate this world of multiple perspectives? How do we even make choices and form our own beliefs? Seems so tricky.
I think this is where critical thinking becomes super crucial. Like postmodernism doesn't advocate for blindly accepting every perspective you come across, but it's more about, engaging with different ideas, analyzing their underlying assumptions, and then like evaluating their strengths and weaknesses, being able to say, okay, this idea makes sense to me and here's why, or this one doesn't really resonate and here's why. It's all about that process of thinking critically and forming your own conclusions.
So it's not about rejecting reason altogether. It's about using reason in a more nuanced and self-aware way.
Exactly. It's about understanding the limits of reason, recognizing that our own perspectives are always like partial. They come from a specific place and time, but we can still value reason as a tool for understanding the world around us.
So it sounds like both modernism and postmodernism are asking us to really think critically about the world around us, but just in slightly different ways. Modernism seems to be lamenting the loss of this more stable, ordered world,
Mm.
while postmodernism kind of embraces the chaos and challenges us to find meaning within it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic insight. They each offer this unique perspective on the complexities of contemporary life.
Okay, this is all super fascinating. But all this philosophy, what does it mean for us as individuals, like in our everyday lives? How can we apply these ideas in a practical way?
Well, I think for starters, modernism and postmodernism give us this framework for understanding the culture we live in. We're constantly bombarded with messages and images that are shaped by like modernist and postmodernist sensibilities, whether it's the movies we watch, the music we listen to, the books we read, even the way we interact online. Like these movements are everywhere.
It's true. I never really thought about it that way before. But
Yeah.
now that you mention it, I can see how much these ideas are kind of woven into the fabric of our lives.
They really are. And understanding their key characteristics can help us decode those cultural messages and engage with them more critically. It's like having this secret decoder ring, that unlocks all these hidden meanings and motivations behind the things we encounter every day.
Oh, I love that analogy. It's like being able to see through the surface and understand like the deeper forces at play.
Exactly. It's about becoming more aware, more conscious of the things that are shaping our perceptions and influencing how we view the world.
But beyond just understanding culture, do you think that modernism and postmodernism also offer valuable life lessons,
Mhm.
things that we can apply to our own personal growth and development?
Oh, absolutely. I think they teach us to embrace ambiguity, question our assumptions, and be open to different perspectives. They remind us that the world is constantly changing and we need to be adaptable, willing to learn new ways of thinking and being.
That's so relevant today, especially with all the rapid changes happening in technology and society as a whole.
Couldn't agree more. And perhaps the most important lesson they offer is this: to be critical consumers of information, to not just accept things at face value, but to really dig deeper, ask questions, and form our own opinions.
It's about cultivating that inner skeptic, that voice that says, wait a minute, is this really true?
Hmm.
What are the underlying assumptions here?
Yeah.
Who benefits from me believing this?
Exactly. It's about developing that healthy skepticism, but at the same time, remaining open to new ideas and possibilities, holding those two things in tension.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of these movements, though. There's so much more to explore and unpack.
There always is, but that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Modernism and postmodernism, they're like invitations to this never-ending journey of discovery and questioning. It's a process, not a destination.
I love that. So as we wrap up this part of our exploration, I want to leave our listener with a thought-provoking question, something to ponder as they continue their own deep dive into these fascinating ideas. Ready for it?
Hit me with it. I'm all ears.
All right. So if, as Jean Baudrillard suggests, we're living in this world of simulations and hyperreality, where the lines between the real and the simulated are constantly blurring, how do we even know what's authentic anymore? How do we figure out what's real and what's just a copy, an image, a carefully constructed illusion?
That's such a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what it means to be human in the 21st century. We're surrounded by all these images, all this information, all these narratives vying for our attention. It's up to us to develop the critical thinking skills, the discernment to navigate this incredibly complex landscape.
It's a challenge, but it's also an exciting opportunity, right? To shape our own understanding of the world and find meaning in the midst of it all.
Exactly. It's a journey. And remember, the deep dive doesn't end here. It's an ongoing process of exploration and discovery.
It's amazing to think about how these philosophical currents, modernism and postmodernism, they actually influence us, even if we're not, like, consciously aware of them,
Yeah, definitely. It's like there are these invisible forces shaping the art we create and even the stories we tell ourselves.
And even the way we see the world, right?
Absolutely, shaping our whole perception of reality.
And what I find so fascinating is that, like, neither one is quote-unquote right or wrong. It's more about recognizing, I think, the strengths and limitations of each perspective and how they both contribute to what it even means to be human in this crazy modern world.
Yeah, they're not these like opposing forces locked in battle. They're more like two sides of the same coin, each offering a different way of understanding the human experience.
Exactly. They offer us, like, different ways of seeing, different tools for thinking, different lenses through which we can view all the complexities of life today.
And those different lenses, they're super helpful.
They are. Think of it this way. You have a whole toolkit of intellectual approaches just at your disposal. You could use the modernist lens to explore those deep personal experiences, those psychological depths that we all grapple with. Or you can pick up the postmodernist lens to, deconstruct all those, like, cultural forces that shape who we are and how we see ourselves. It's like having this multi-tool for the mind.
I like that, a multi-tool for the mind. And the best part, you don't have to pick just one. You can switch back and forth between them depending on the situation or the question you're exploring.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes this whole, like, exploration so exciting. It's not about finding, like, this one definitive answer,
Yeah.
but it's more about developing a more flexible, a more nuanced way of thinking about the world.
Flexibility and nuance, those are key.
They are. And it's about, embracing the messiness, the ambiguity, the ever-changing nature of our modern lives.
Beautifully put. And who knows, maybe in that embrace and that willingness to let go of certainty, maybe that's where we discover a new kind of beauty, a new meaning, a new way of being in this world.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into modernism and postmodernism, is there, like, one key takeaway that you hope our listener, walks away with today?
That's a tough one. But if I had to pick just one, I think it would be the importance of critical thinking. Both modernism and postmodernism, in their own different ways, they encourage us to really question assumptions, to look beyond the surface,
Yeah.
and to ultimately, think for ourselves in a world that's just saturated with information. Developing those critical thinking skills is, I think, more crucial than ever.
Absolutely. It's about becoming, like, savvy navigators of this sea of information, questioning all those narratives we encounter, and forming our own, like, informed perspectives.
Exactly. So to our listener out there, I encourage you, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the complexities of this crazy journey we call life.
I love that. And remember, folks, the deep dive doesn't end here. There's a whole world of ideas out there just waiting to be discovered. So stay curious, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive adventure.